for that, and we're going to start our deputations by appointment.
We recommend 11:30, so you do.
It is 11:30.
Okay, cool.
Isn't it?
1 minute.
Oh.
Sorry.
You've got when it's 11:30 we'll start. So do you want to come forward and sit at the end of the table? Who? The councillors are not out there. Can you come to the end of the table so that we can start at 11:30? Who? The hearing of the first of several deputations that we have. We have to stick to a strict time limit because we've got a number to get through. The first is Helen Broughton speaking to item 13. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. I didn't quite catch. I thought it was 10 minutes. Is there only 5?
No, there's 10 minutes.
10 minutes, fine. Okay. Thank you. It feels a bit disconcerting only having some people here, but look, I'll start.
Helen, we've got a quorum here and we have to stick to time.
Okay, thank you.
And we are spread out because of the COVID requirements.
I realise that.
You're biting into your own time.
Thank you. Can I just note that this is a personal submission?
Yes.
Our board failed to read carefully that we had a chance to submit by the 4th of November. I tried to convene a Zoom meeting and we were cut out of that at a point. So I've proceeded with this, but it's my personal submission. I'm going to say something that possibly is difficult. This is the most outrageous planning legislation I've seen in my 25 years involvement in local government with a particular focus on planning. It's outrageous in terms of its potential impact on communities and its time frame, where it is hoped to have the legislation through Parliament by Christmas. People are not fully aware of what's happening and the likely impact on their communities. So I'm making a suggestion that council expresses its sense of outrage, or a softer word if you wish, in your submission, and it appears oral submissions will be heard and council request permission to speak. Number 2, there's no reason for Christchurch being a Tier 1 city if Tier 1 is defined as having a shortage of land supply.
It's not.
I refer to the 30-page submission, and I've got it here, that council made to central government in October or February 2020.
Who's that?
It's mine, I think, on the proposed national policy standards on urban development.
Could you turn it off, please?
It's gone, thank you. Sorry, I'm referring to a lengthy submission you made. And in it you state that Christchurch City does not have a housing capacity issue. The Greater Christchurch Urban Development and Christchurch District Plan provide for sufficient housing for at least 30 years at current rates of uptake. The Council does not agree with the apparent underlying assumption in the proposed NPSUD that housing is unaffordable because the planning system is overly restrictive, preventing the market from supplying affordable land. So those are just snippets taken from your earlier submission. And after the approval of the National Standards on Urban Development, August 2020, I phoned the public servant responsible for moving these through Parliament to ask him why government had included Christchurch as a Tier 1 city. And the answer was that we were the largest city in the South Island. So he wasn't saying we had a land supply problem. Now, I'm not as versed as you people are as whether there's been a land supply issue since, but in February 2020, the statements I've made were what Christchurch City was saying to, in fact, central government. C, the area south of Rickett Road has been zoned medium density for over 20 years. This has not been a success. We are exposing other areas to this density and consequent difficulties. And can I say that our medium density plan projects households at 30 households per hectare. We're currently running at 75 households per hectare. So we're going far beyond what the plan thought we would have. Technical issues may allow more intense development higher than 3 stories. If development goes beyond the standards or the 3 stories, the application needs a resource consent, and from reading some of the legal papers on this, it requires restricted discretionary status. This means that council can only consider standards where the building does not comply and notification is generally not allowed. So I think it'll be difficult to stop 4 and 5 story buildings, and it'll be done without notification. And we've got an example of that where the 42 apartments, 5-storey 42 apartments are being built opposite Christchurch Girls High School, and it went through without notification. I'll leave the urban design panels. Independent hearings panel. The legislation proposes an independent hearings panel be established for the district plan. Christchurch has a particular problem with this, as councillors have had no involvement with district planning for many years. After the earthquake, an independent hearings panel was established to do the new district plan, which was ratified in 2016. Now, I've had no problem particularly with that independent hearings panel, but it means that planning is being removed further and further away from the community and its elected representatives. And so I'm making a suggestion that council ask government to note that it is many years since Christchurch councillors were actively involved in the Christchurch city plan. So compared to other centres, we've been at a disadvantage for quite a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Anne?
Okay.
Thanks, Helen. You didn't. You sort of skimmed over the design
Yes.
panel, but I'm.
Sorry about that.
It's all right.
No, it's not good enough. Can you switch it off?
Sorry.
Oh, it's gone. You
Sam,
said
stop rigging it.
Just joking. That's all right.
Well, I thought it was either you or James. Sorry, carry on.
yeah. So you say in your deputation that your experience of hearings panels is that while urban design panels can achieve improvements and the development is generally approved without that. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes,
Don't
look,
you have
having-
high confidence in
Yes, having been on hearings panels, any development that it breaches the actual city plan and it goes for a resource consent, it needs to go to an urban design panel. Now, they make improvements on it, so there's no question about that, but it generally gets approved. And yeah, so it's you can't put too much faith in the urban design panels. They can only do what, in fact, they can do. Now, the 5-storey apartment complex opposite Christchurch Girls High School went through an urban design panel. And so and it was non-notified, but 5 stories. So it's just hard to get some major change if in fact it's required.
Sam?
Yes, sorry about that.
Thanks, Helen. No, I definitely wasn't ringing you, don't worry. Look, in terms of, the challenge we have is central government legislation.
Yes.
Have you engaged locally with anyone and raised the concerns specifically with government?
No, and I haven't been active on this because I was waiting for the council submission to come through. So I've probably briefed residents groups who are concerned. But how far that's gone is really up
Yeah.
to infect them. Just out of interest, I was down in the same area where we had the girls' high school 5-storey, and there's another developer doing a block of land close there. It's 3 stories, and it looks reasonable. So you can get reasonable development. It's just to try and guard against what's potentially can happen.
I just wondered.
And I'd probably ask you to make a strong submission to central government saying that you're opposed for some certain reasons, and then if that's not acceptable, say that I'm quite comfortable on the whole with what you're currently proposing as changes.
I just wondered though, I mean, given it's bipartisan between National and Labour, have you
Yes.
reached out to either National or Labour locally on that?
Yes, look, I'm advising people to write to Sarah Palett and Jerry Brownlee, who's the ex-MP. So yes, though I think HE-led council has weight. If you write something, it has more weight than individuals.
But you're making a submission to us about a submission that we're going to make. Are you making a submission to the select committee?
Oh yes.
Right.
Oh, but I sort of know the processes, and I did make one on the natural and built environment bill, but I did feel it was very difficult because it was on Zoom,
Yeah, no, same.
and I felt points I was making weren't getting through. I mean, that's just yeah. And I feel I'm an individual too.
Okay, well, look, thank you. The time's come to an end. So thank you very much, Helen, for
Thank
your submission, and certainly encourage you to talk to MPs on both sides of the House.
Absolutely.
And certainly encourage you to make submissions
Thank you.
into the process, and I'll be doing that with everyone who appears.
Thank you.
Cameron Bradley is here online, I think. He's just coming into the picture. Are you there, Cameron?
He's got his microphone muted.
I am. Good morning.
Can you turn your camera on? Good. No, you're not the packaging forum. You're Cameron, right? Welcome. You've got 10 minutes, so thank you very much.
Thank you. I sent through some slides. Perfect. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to voice my my thoughts on the National Policy Statement of Urban Development and what's going on there. So I just want to note that our cities have not evolved perfectly over the last several decades, and I feel there's a need for us to transition to 21st century cities. So this slide here is just a little bit of data around why I make that statement that our cities have not evolved well. So the top left graph is our CPI, increased about 100%, 80% since 1992. Top right graph is our house prices, increased about 560%. So about 6 times faster than inflation. This leads to, you know, all sorts of people being locked out of the housing market, primarily the youth and those who don't already own houses. Bottom left is our greenhouse gas emissions. That was on quite a steep climb until sort of mid to late 2000s, and which it's plateaued, but I'm still aware that we've got some really ambitious climate goals that I'm concerned we are not set up to meet very well. The bottom right tells us where those emissions are, a whole bunch of them in transport as a result of our of the urban form of our cities. So, I mean, these issues, while they have come from the past, they've come from a result of all sorts of people, you know, making decisions, yourselves and people in your shoes before you, regional councils, governments, as well as the private market and things like that. Next slide, please. So supply and demand sort of shows that we're not actually going to get apartments in Avonhead and things like that. The demand will be where public transport is, where workplaces are, shops, education. So I think it's just important to note that actually while while this frees up the market, it doesn't actually, it's not going to have significant impacts out in the suburbs. Putting conditions on supply means it's harder to reach the sweet spot in the middle of where supply equals demand. And seeing as we have a massive imbalance in supply and demand, indicated by our really high prices, it just shows that we need to remove some of those barriers to supply, such as what the National Policy Statement does. And I feel like that's, I understand some of the concerns that have been raised around, well, this has been forced upon councils and things like that, but I also feel like it's been forced upon the government to force it upon councils, because we haven't dealt with these issues as a city, and we haven't created the right amount of supply and demand and things like that. Even more amplified in Auckland and places like that. Next slide, please. So what I think we what I think we could do is show that we can deal with these issues without intervention. So there's plenty of things we could do, ourselves, supporting newer and larger developments, so we can share gardens, cars, laundries, lounges, things like that. We can build more closer to places we want to be, things like that. We can work on a proper plan which integrates transport and land use. We've already missed some significant COVID-19 infrastructure, and Simplicity's just announced 10,000 houses, none of them in Christchurch. We could look at proper public transport. A 2% mode share shows that it's really not that feasible. I know there's a lot that's not under your remit, but you've got you do have a significant platform and ability to influence that, and we will need to work alongside ECAN and NZTA, but it sort of seems to be passed the baton around. We can back the city however we can. Project 8011, chuck it on steroids and stop it worrying about offending suburbanites. The whole point of making the city centre more competitive is to pull people back in there, and there's going to need to be some offence in there a little bit. And one idea I really like is getting Canterbury University moved into the city. One of the potential risks with this legislation is that Ilam is an area of high, cheap housing demand, indicated by students and low incomes and things like that. So I feel like if that demand was removed from there and put into the city, there'd be quite a different market there. Next slide, please. And so I just think we need to be thinking about our grandchildren when making these decisions. As at the moment we seem to make decisions for now and for tomorrow, but they have these significant consequences down the line, such as a largely unaffordable housing market and things, and carbon emissions through the roof and things like that. Next slide, please. So past councils, I just want to indicate that you guys make up a lot of the past councils. 10 of you were on there last year, 7 the year last term, 7 the term before, 4 the term before, and Yanni, you seem to be the longest. Oh, and I don't have you on there, sorry, Leanne. But,
I don't count.
but there's a lot of history in there, and a lot of you will be around for another few terms, hopefully, and so just it's while the next election is important, we do need to remember that we're passing it on to councils several years down the track, and these decisions do impact through there. And last slide, please. So I just want to indicate this is our population. So on the right pie, you've got this little blue part here. This is the people like myself who will get out and submit. These people have to be honest, a little bit more time, maybe willpower to submit to you guys, and it's quite a small proportion of the population. You've got the yellow chunk outside it, people who will vote every 3 years but may not get involved in your day-to-day matters. but then that actually only makes up some smallish proportion of the total pie of the people that are involved in Christchurch. You've got this big portion on the left, the orange people who don't vote. So only 40% of people voted. So there's about another 60% of people who aren't even voting there, that we still need to be thinking about. I feel the blue pie down the bottom, about 20% of our population is under 18 and can't vote yet. And then there's this grey chunk up top with a question mark on it, and that's kind of where that's kind of our future generations, people who haven't been born yet. And then as well as that, there's people who we want hopefully to immigrate here. And we can make that chunk, I suppose, as big as we like. And that's where I see a little bit of opportunity as well, is we don't actually need to densify just for our current. If we densify in the right space and move our population a bit higher, then we can create quite a different city with some different dynamics and a really cool one. So that's my thoughts on the NPS of urban development. I do think it's a step forward, albeit a forced step forward. I do feel like it's one of the most significant pieces of legislation I've seen in probably several years, mainly because it's concrete and I can see something happening.
Did you say?
Thank you for taking.
Did you say densify in the right place?
Absolutely, it has to be in the right places, and that's where
you wouldn't be supporting urban sprawl as opposed to densifying in the right place. Yeah.
Well, the urban sprawl that we've got is a result of us not being able to densify, right? Because it's been so hard for us to build up in different places. We've had to go out, right? It's been cheaper, it's been easier for people to buy a farm out in the Wop-Wops and plop 30 houses out there. Whereas if we were able to look at our public transport corridors, if we had them mapped out and had some ability around there, and I know there's some scope there, but it's still that's where we should be densifying, around the public transport corridors, central, close to shops, works, education, things like that. Urban sprawl is a significant issue that we've seen not only here but in several New Zealand, Australian, and American cities, which results in this car-centric lifestyle, and which has hidden costs. Effectively, it hides all these environmental, social, health costs, and you pay for the car now, but all these costs come down the line, and they'll be paid for in our health bills, in our loneliness, mental health, and things like that, and then also in our emissions and air quality, those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, look, thank you very much, Cameron. I mean, I think that ties in with our submission too, that, the balancing between, what needs to happen in those proximity to public transport routes, hubs, the different services and things. Yeah, the 15-minute neighbourhood, I think, is the dream.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Let's get there quicker.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your submission. Thank you.
Thank you. See you later.
The next one is Barbara Stewart, represented by David Lynch.
Both into the meeting.
Oh, so they're both presenting?
They're both here, so
Okay. Hello? That's not Barbara Stewart. Hello. David, you're representing Barbara Stewart today?
No, Barbara is coming. We've had a few technical issues here. I do apologise. Just if you can bear with me, I'll just get her very quickly.
Does she know he's in her house?
No. You're speaking. We're ready to go. No.
Hello, Barbara.
Right. Barbara was just getting a cup of coffee, actually, councillors, in there. But they'll have to wait now.
Just take the working apron off with them.
Sorry, this is all being live streamed, just sharing.
Oh, that's right.
what you call multidextrous at the moment.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you for having me. Do I begin now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Madam Mayor, councils and staff, good morning. The city as a whole has every reason to be very concerned about the planned forced situation of the Resource Management Enabling Housing Supply and Other Matters Amendment Bill. Those of you who have lived through the years of and after the major and small earthquakes will remember the council of the day had many consultations with the people of Christchurch to be informed by them of their hopes for the future for their city, their broken city. Repeatedly, citizens said they wanted a green city of trees and green spaces. This was right up at the top of the items of what they were looking for. For an overall flat city, the umbrella of green gives it an environment which brings beauty plus. This bill represents a significant threat to everything the people loved and wanted. The intention of the bill is the intensification of streamlined process of the development within the urban areas. It will have profound consequences, which the speed that it has been released upon the council and citizens couldn't be further from a genuine opportunity for submissions and hearing process across the country. The public barely know what has been unleashed upon the management of their cities. The government is quite obviously intent on removing local body responsibilities and initiatives in the individual development of each urban city, restricting rights of appeal, rights of local and important interpretations of their cities. In Council's response, its suggestion of 2.5 radius from the boundary of the centre city will encompass nearly all of the old suburbs of the city where the mature trees stand in the main. They would be cut out for development. Over the past 40 years, there's already been a significant loss of these trees throughout Rickett, Fendleton, St Albans, Merivale, and a whole circle around that perimeter. Yes. Much has already gone into these in these suburbs, and infill will just make this much worse. Support must also be given to the pressure of heritage buildings plus heritage areas, those that are left, of course. In defining these, it must be upon our city, not Wellington government opinion. Throughout the bill, there are the words, "you will be required," and this constantly is repeated. If not, matters will be referred to the Minister for the Environment, who will have the power to decide. So all power and all decisions will be taken out of our city's hands. This attitude must be questioned. Wellington must not rule our city, and there have been many examples of officials not appreciating the special history of Christchurch, and it is special and unique in New Zealand, who attempt to trample on the individuality of this whole area. Funding will fall on the council to build adequate infrastructure. We know Christchurch already has a serious issue with restoration, rebuilding, or just temporarily restoring infrastructure. This, as an invisible necessity, can frequently not get the updating it requires. The past generations have been guilty of not giving it sufficient resources. They'd rather build an obvious city amenity for the citizens than restore the dull but critical piping and other vital services. In the section 77H, I think I've got this right, great concern is the demand that section 3.2 of the Act must, and it says, demonstrate why the territorial authority considers that the relevant area is subject to a qualified matter. Justify why that view is the correct one. Within this lies a very high degree of individual interpretation, as has recently been discovered in the 2016-17 development passed to develop land surrounding the chateau and the park. Planning permission considered no notification of the neighbours, including Christchurch Girls High School, was necessary, even though permission was given for a major loss of trees and greenery, considerable additional parking required because the school has more parking with its students, plus all the residents that will then be part of their development, and the loss of a small but very real environmentally attractive area of Rickett. The planner declared there were little or no consequences to a major residential development. in the order of over 60 units, living units. Not even the school across the road of over 1,000 pupils was informed. I suggest this view was very wrong, greatly troubling, and showed a complete inability to accept the area and its residents will suffer from this loss. The clause allows this to become even more entrenched, a reality of planners. Sorry, I can't read my writing. The ignoring of local or even public opinion. There has to be far more restrictions within the whole concept of this device for increased accommodation by the government. Christchurch is a special city. It has a unique history, and its individual character and environment must be fought for in what I consider a draconian manoeuvre to ride roughshod over the local citizens, the council, and their environment where they live. Councillors, I beg you to consider very seriously the consequences of this bill to Christchurch, now and for its future. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I guess one of the questions that's already been asked of others is that given that this is a government bill that is supported by the opposition, so it's a bipartisan approach, have you raised these concerns with Labour and National members of Parliament?
No, a bit like everybody else. I only heard this about a week ago.
So did we.
So I have not. No, this is the first time I've spoken of it to the council.
And will you make a submission to the Select Committee?
Which is what, in about a week's time?
Well, it has to be submitted. Sure. It has to be submitted on Tuesday at the latest.
Yes, the 16th or whatever.
Yep.
Well, I will most probably make this one that I've just prepared.
Good.
So I'll get advice on that, and I'll certainly try to make it. Good. And the fact that it's bipartisan just disturbs me more. That means both sides of the House have no real understanding of what will happen to Christchurch.
No. So in terms of the submission that we've drafted, do you have any particular views on that? I mean, it seems to have picked up a number of the points that you've made.
Yes, it has. The only thing that I think that I've spoken to was the 2.5 peripheral circle. And when you put that hand on the map of Christchurch and say that nothing beyond that is going to be considered, I don't accept that. I think you could, if the developments are done well and attractively and not vast ones such as we've seen the photo in the paper yesterday or the day before of what was done throughout Scotland and England, throughout Eastern Europe. We all remember those from sort of after the war. If it's nothing like that, but attractively done with imagination, I don't see why it can't go far beyond. I don't quite understand why they're picking on the older areas, which actually already have the trees. We don't want to lose any more trees here. We've lost enough.
Yeah, the 2.5K is not on the legislation. It's a proposal, and it may not.
No, well, it was a council proposal. I think I read it there.
Yeah.
But I just think to limit it to that when other opportunities could well come up for whatever reason in the future, I'd leave it open so everything can be, viewed at the time.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. I probably agree with that. Anyone? No? Look, thank you, Barbara. That's very helpful. Thank you. And I'm glad that you're going to be making a submission directly to the Select Committee.
And I'll send the copy of this. I'm a bit late. I was reading my handwriting. I'll send a copy.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
And try to deal with us. Yes.
Great. David, would you like to take over?
Yeah, thank you. No, I just need to check. Did you manage to receive a copy of this deputation?
It's been published on the Big Tin Can. I didn't get it till 11 o'clock.
It was received at 11 o'clock last night.
I know. I do apologise. Okay.
It's on the Big
11 o'clock today. It's now been added to the Big Tin Can, which means that councillors will have to go out of it to go back into it because it will.
I do apologise.
We'll need to refresh it. It's all right. There's a reason we need them early.
I understand.
Thanks,
I do
David.
That. First of all, I do commend the council for what we've observed so far in the public domain, and I think it's very important, as is what you've done with Three Waters. Obviously, I'm making this deputation in my capacity as the Director of Momentous Public Relations, and the focus of the deputation is in regard to specifically item 3, of the submission that you're making. I won't read it all, the particular clause, or the reference, but it's around the lack of engagement with local government. And I also wish to reference the excellent, very robust council submission, 14th of Feb 2020, signed by you, Madam Mayor, submission on urban development bill. And in the submission conclusion, it stated the following: Huinga Ora is required to take a genuine partnership approach with stakeholders when developing an urban development projects, with open lines of communication and consideration from both parties to ensure the best possible outcomes for all, and the importance of working with and undertaking meaningful engagement with local communities so as to understand their aspirations for their community as is recognised. I commend you for that. It's very clear the government hasn't listened, but it's not a done deal yet. I also believe that it is widely acknowledged that this bill does not address the issue of affordability for first home buyers. Rather, it dismantles democratic rights for local government. Specifically, I make the following comments. Democracy crisis in the making. In my 24 years of professional communication engagement with both central and local government, I believe we are witness to a democracy crisis in the making. Our democracy is facing a crisis we haven't seen before, and it is essential that we stand up and say no to those that wish to do it harm. History has shown that the best way to protect democracy is by standing united in its defence of the values we all hold dear. An engaged and informed public is at the heart of our democracy, and it is critically important that the people are fully informed about the threats we face and how we can fight to protect our democracy together. If we do not take a stand against those that wish to override the will of the people, it will be the death knell for local government. The stakes could not be higher, and our democracy is under threat. Democracy is the foundation document of the United Nations. Democracy provides an environment that respects human rights and fundamental freedoms, and in which the freely expressed will of the people is exercised. People have a say in the decisions and can hold decision makers to account. I believe this bill contravenes the New Zealand obligations to the United Nations, and I will be encouraging people to consider writing to the United Nations accordingly. My next heading, state-controlled planning of New Zealand Tier 1 cities. The amendment bill represents the introduction of state-controlled housing regime. A clear pattern of state-controlled planning is emerging in New Zealand, whereby planning processes and decisions are being removed from the hands of local decision makers and transferred to the hands of the state. For example, Three Waters, and now the proposed residential intensification program, not to mention the surprise that we're now all going to be fluoridated. Furthermore, just as in East Germany, under the Socialistic Unity Party, the New Zealand government is proposing to mandate where mass housing construction is to be executed. At first widely accepted by the East German government's housing program became subject to increasing criticism. Referred to as the slab, it became the standard dwelling experience for the majority of urban populations. The buildings also gave East Germany strikingly uniform aspects, with cities coming to substantially resemble each other from one end of the country to the other. As in East Germany, with the proposed intensification result in path dependency. Path dependency occurs when it is easier or more cost effective to continue along an already set path than to create an entirely new one. In East Germany, the slab housing was continuously built until the end of the German Democratic Republic in 1989-1990. By then, there were barely enough construction firms left that could execute construction. Is this the future for New Zealand Tier 1 cities as determined by this government state-controlled planning? Undermining of parliamentary democracy. Fundamental to a democracy are the rights to influence public decision-making and decision-makers, and to be treated with equal respect as of equal worth in the decision-making. Participation in the democratic society is integral to stable and responsive governance. Again, the United Nations, for example, recently issued guidance suggesting that the way a government provides for its people to have a say in policy process and development of legislation has a direct impact on the way they view the legitimacy of the democratic process. In New Zealand, the mechanism to ensure participation and accountability are not always effective and have at times been undermined by unduly limiting opportunities for making submissions to select committees or passing legislation under urgency. When state-controlled planning, in other words, top-down planning, is imposed on a population without adequate public consultation, the results are devastating. My recommendation to the Council: judicial review. Although the Council cannot interfere with the decision of Parliament, a Council can seek a judicial review of the actions of the Executive to see whether they acted within the powers given to them by the legislation. A decision can be overturned on the grounds of illegality if the decision maker did not have the legal power to make the decision for existence, Parliament gave them less discretion than they thought, or it might be because the decision maker, who is supposed to give someone the chance to make representation before deciding on their case, failed to do so. New Zealand is supposed to have an open and participatory government. Essentially, good consultation is fit for purpose and tailored to both nature and the magnitude of the proposals and the needs of stakeholders. I consider the government's introduction of the Resource Management Enabling Housing Supply and Other Matters Amendment under urgency and without allowing for adequate public consultation and input is a violation of the public's democratic right. The government has demonstrated little or no regard for the voice of the people. The proposed intensification will be far-reaching and have long-term adverse consequences. Furthermore, it can be expected to have rule of law and Bill of Rights implications. The rule of law recognises that people are entitled to the peaceful enjoyment of their property. The New Zealand Bill of Rights provides a right for peaceful ownership and enjoyment of private property, and its foundational value of our legal tradition and common law has therefore always protected private property rights carefully. Given the aforementioned, I believe this council, possibly in association with the other councils, should seek a judicial review. However, there is more immediate action that I would strongly recommend you consider today. You have already joined with other mayors and councils to oppose the government's Three Waters proposal. Like Three Waters, the introduction of this bill represents state-controlled planning and the transfer of decision-making processes and powers to central government. It is widely accepted that New Zealand has a housing accommodation problem. However, a one-size-fits-all solution is not the answer for Tier 1 cities. In all likelihood, it will create more long-term problems than it is purported to solve in the short term. As suggested, I believe a no to state-controlled planning campaign is required for sending a clear message to our government. The key objectives of the campaign will be to promote the democratic balanced planning that isn't rushed and provides for community identity and cohesion. And I would anticipate a campaign like this would involve all media, TV, radio, and online. I also support the recommendation from Helen Broughton that Christchurch should be removed as a Tier 1 city, and it is an imperative that the Council challenge the bill for this. In conclusion, our democracy is facing a crisis we haven't seen before, and it is essential that we stand up and say no to those that wish to do harm. History has shown the best way to protect democracy is by standing united in defence of the values we all hold dear. If this council does not take a stand against those that wish to override the will of the people it represents, it will be the death knell for local government. The stakes could not be higher, and our democracy is under assault. I trust that you will all have the courage and do what is required to protect it. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well, I think you must have timed that submission so that you completed it absolutely on the dot of the 10 minutes. So thank you very much for your submission, David. It's much appreciated. And we'll move on to the next one, which is the Rickett and Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association. and we should have Tony Simons representing the association online. We're going to let him in? Good, thank you.
Barbara and David will log off now.
Log off. How do we log off?
Right. So we've got Tony Simons here from the Rickett and Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association. Thank you very much for making a deputation today on this matter. I'll hand over to
Madam
you.
Chair. Good, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Well, I can hear you as well, so that's a bonus. Isn't
That
it?
is a bonus.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and councillors. Thanks very much. Just anticipating a question that may be asked at the end. We have made a submission on this to the committee, Environment Committee in Wellington, and I just wanted to talk very briefly about some of the content of that submission. I represent the Rickett and Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association. I suppose we are probably the epitome of the NIMBY brigade, really, when people who are proponents of densification try to target those who are looking for a more balanced view. I like to think that our view is more about Christchurch as an environment rather than the issue of housing on its own, because the two are intertwined. And I think part of the miscalculation, I suppose, by government is based around the fact that no one really appears to understand how to manage the current housing crisis, if that in fact is what is happening. There is a prevailing view that if you build more houses, then the price will go down. But there's absolutely no historical evidence to show that has happened in the past. And at the moment, we're building more houses than we ever have, and yet the house prices continue to go up. The reality is that the government controls interest rates, and it's low interest rates that have stimulated demand for houses, and it's that demand and for houses where people can borrow more money has effectively created the problem of house prices continuing to rise. And I believe that when interest rates do start to go up, and hopefully they won't go up too quickly, the increase in house prices will be moderated. The rising cost of homes is the problem, not the supply, and that I think applies particularly in Christchurch, where we've seen repeated stories about the fact that Christchurch actually does have enough houses and more than enough urban land to build more to last us for at least another 30 years. So what I find difficult to understand is why we are in so much of a rush to destroy trees and gardens, when effectively those trees and gardens are what we hold out as being what makes Christchurch special. We're even moving down the path of arguing that Christchurch should be a national park city. And at the same time, we're faced with government policy, central government policy, which takes control away from local councils and forces us to do the exact opposite. Contributing to climate change, contributing to urban warming, densifying Christchurch at an accelerated rate, but no thought appears to be given to the fact that this will have an adverse climate change impact. The housing strategy that I'd like to see government propose, and I'd like to see the council fight for, is a strategy that makes comfortable and attractive and environmentally friendly housing more affordable in Christchurch, rather than the haphazard clearing of residential properties of trees and gardens and building 3-story or even higher apartments. We're also seeing developers buying properties and then sitting on them, effectively waiting to leverage even more profit. So they're not actually necessarily buying properties to build apartments. They're buying properties because they know the prices are going to continue to go up, and they're actually constraining the housing supply by doing that. So the simplistic view that denser urban areas in Christchurch will somehow lead to increased housing affordability is, I believe, questionable. In fact, there is research which shows that the opposite may be true, that higher urban densities are actually associated with worse housing affordability for both owners and renters, partly because intensification tends to happen in poorer suburbs, and they become gentrified as a result. In other words, there may be an inverse association between urban density and housing affordability, such that houses become more affordable when urban densities are lower. And as I said earlier, the land banking issue is also having a skewed effect. Hey, look, we talk about Christchurch being a potential national park city, and yet the tree canopy cover in this city is now less than 12%, and it's still dropping. Auckland is nearly 19%. Wellington is more than 30%. We're even behind Melbourne when it comes to tree cover. There's also a direct association between densification and increased social isolation and poorer physical and mental well-being. And that is something I know that the council in its submission to the committee has mentioned. So look, I want us to stop the destruction of the trees in our urban areas. I reject the over-intensification that's been practiced by some developers and which will be enabled by this bill. And I think there is a case for balanced densification targeted where it is needed, it is appropriate, and it is affordable. And we should be prioritising amenity and supporting communities and respecting the environment. I would like to speak very quickly and finish by just dealing with each of the key issues that the council has, or the key points that the council has put into its draft submission to the Environment Committee. The 2.5 kilometre radius from the boundary of the city centre it's difficult to evaluate because the map that I've seen doesn't really show exactly where that falls, so I won't comment on it. But I suppose I'd have to commend the council on saying it is attempting to define where densification might be appropriate and where it might not be. I believe that that 5.32, which is the second of your key points, should have some qualified protection for trees on a site. So while you are asking for 20% of a site's area to be landscaped or planted, and a requirement for a specified percentage to be used for trees, I would like to think that you respect the trees that are already there. And it's our view that the council submission still allows for all trees to be cut down and replaced with some saplings, which will provide no environmental benefit at all. So I'd like to see 5.32 changed so that there is some qualified protection for all existing trees on a site. And I'm not sure exactly how that might be worded, but it's the existing trees that are the most valuable, not the saplings that the developers put in their place. And let's face it, put the saplings in 5 years' time, they'll cut them down as well. The 5.33 of the council submission talks about building standards that should better protect well-being, but it doesn't say how that should happen. And I just like to say that there should be a maximum density, and there doesn't appear to be one in the medium density zone at the moment. Building standards should take account of issues like windows and ventilation, where the light and the sunshine is, neighbourhood and community amenities. Maybe roof colour needs to be controlled so that urban landscapes don't heat up. And there needs to be some limits on how much hard landscaping there can be around a building. Finally, I'd just like to talk about the medium density zone and the proposal that you have a minimum density of 15 households per hectare. That is in the council submission to the committee. I can't understand why we don't have a maximum limit proposed on household density in medium density residential zones. Not having a maximum or upper limit seems to run counter to the other clauses in your submission that seem to focus on environment and well-being, and I think illustrate what a blunt and inappropriate instrument the national policy statement is for Christchurch. Now, 65 households per hectare is a density level that I believe the council already validated in its enhanced development mechanism, which was part of the post-earthquake land use recovery plan. And it seems to me that that 65 households per hectare limit should be a maximum that may be appropriate without unduly compromising design and pattern of buildings on a site, and might still encourage useful and attractive open areas. And just one last point is the issue of where 6-storey buildings might be built, or 6-storey apartment blocks might be built in Christchurch. And Schedule 3B of the bill is proposing building heights of at least 6 stories within a walkable catchment of rapid transit stops, city centre zones and metropolitan centre zones. And I don't know what these rapid transit stops, city centre zones and metropolitan centre zones actually are. The bill doesn't define them. So I submit there needs to be some agreement and clarity around which areas of Christchurch might be impacted by the proposal to build 6-storey apartment buildings as of right. These should not include suburban shopping areas, which just happen to be on a bus route. And I think the council should submit on that and take into account the serious concerns around trees and shading and urban environment that 6-storey apartment blocks would have if they were built in places like Westfield or the Palms or Barrington or any of the other, or Northwood, those areas, and the impact that they would have.
Yeah, we've already submitted on that. So you've come to the end of your 10 minutes, but...
yeah, that's fine, because it's perfect timing.
Good.
Thank you.
So we did submit on that with the MPS. This piece of legislation fast tracks the implementation of that. So there are elements of our submission that reference back to the original submission. So thank you very much for your presentation this morning. And you said that you've already submitted it to the Select Committee.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Good. That's excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, I've got Diana Shand and Lynn Lockhead representing the Historic Places Trust. Hello, Diana. Hello, Lynn. Have you got your sound on?
No, they haven't.
Yep, right. This is just the joy of Zoom, but thank you. We can hear you now.
We're unmuted.
Great.
Now, would you like to start? No,
not really.
Okay. Well, I just want to... I can't find my...
There is a late addition to the hub too for councillors from the submission, or deputation rather. Sorry.
No, have you found what you said?
No. Can't find
Sorry,
it.
we seem to be a bit disorganised.
We're just finding right.
So I'm here representing Historic Places Canterbury, which supports Diana's submission.
Yeah. Okay, can I speak now?
Yes, please.
Right. Look, Diana Shand here. I live in Montreal Street. I thank the council for the opportunity to speak on this matter. And it was intended that I represent ICON, the Inner City West neighbourhood, but regretfully, at such short notice, I've not been able to put the matter before the core committee. So I must represent myself on this matter. However, having been part of the organisation for years, I'm quite sure of the consistency of my views with that of ICON. And indeed, you'll be aware that ICON has already made submissions on various relevant matters that I raise. So I support and applaud the proposed submission before the City Council today, as it aligns with my views, as indeed the views expressed by ICON and other residents groups, and my residents association have submitted many times over the past decades, and a number of district plan revisions expressing our concern about urban sprawl, the need for social housing, lack of design guidelines, the need to protect urban trees and open space, and keep open space on residential sites and enhance public transport. So as a citizen, I support the submission, and especially its call for design guidelines, built standards, and concern about the haste of this bill, constraining the chance to engage with communities. There is little to provide to protect our communities in this bill, for communities build around place and treasure their character and heritage and their access to open air and sunshine, their trees, and for some of the garden. And for some, it's very important to have a garden where flowers and vegetables can grow or space for children to play. And much in the bill puts this at risk. And indeed, the Auckland Council has released some images of what our cities might look like. And in the written submission that I've sent, emailed through to you, there is a link to that. And it really risks creating the slums of the future. We really see that as a risk. The haste to find an answer to the housing issues, intensification, has already created deep concerns in other major cities. In Wellington, the draft spatial plan has brought in over 2,000, nearly 3,000 written submissions and many oral submissions, including one from the former Attorney General, Chris Finlinson, warning the draft spatial plan risks being an intergenerational botch-up. And I would agree, in my mind, this is what the bill could bring. For while it has good intentions, it does away with normal planning processes. It has the potential to allow destruction of communities, history, sense of place, affordable housing. For there is no guarantee that many in society will gain better or more affordability from the multi-story buildings envisaged. Indeed, we could be building units unsuitable and unaffordable for the diversity of people and their circumstances, which is where we need design guidelines, some consideration of aesthetics, and the ability of councils to require and allow a range of family housing, social housing, open spaces, etc. I would have liked the council to give more consideration to protection of character and heritage, but these are quite essential to our enjoyment of or sense of belonging and place. And the bill does propose a new MDRS standards that must apply in all residential sites in Tier 1, that's quite including Christchurch, and I've given a reference there, but this gives little protection as there is no, unless there are qualifying matters, but this gives little protection as there is no national policy statement on heritage. And we would have difficulty in Christchurch in establishing national importance for some of the buildings where, which we really treasure and are of great importance to our city or to a neighbourhood. While this proposal may protect listed buildings, it may not necessarily protect the sites they sit on. It may also not protect heritage areas or conservation areas or heritage designation areas and the like. This needs to be clarified to understand exactly what heritage aspects, if any, might or might not qualify as a qualifying matter. And it appears that in applying for a dispensation under qualifying matters, it is a discretionary process that each local authority may elect to pursue if it wishes, i.e. doesn't have to in its district plan. It seems it is up to each individual local authority to decide if they will limit this intensification policy in their district plans in any particular areas. If this is the case, each region will have to lobby its own council to ensure it is identifying the relevant heritage, that the relevant heritage will be excluded or have a reduced effect in relation to the identification policy and the MDRS. And this could lead to disaster for some places and buildings we treasure. And Christchurch has already lost so much heritage through the earthquakes. I would urge the council to do its own work outside the submission to add to heritage, bring forward the existing proposals for heritage listings, and consider strengthening planning in precious areas. And I'd like you just to consider what might happen along Worcester Boulevard, facing the Art Centre, and the effect on the Art Centre and some of those really extraordinary, precious heritage buildings in that area, because we do in the Icon area actually live in what has often been referred to the cultural heritage, and certainly the old area of Christchurch, for with extraordinary buildings that even have been suggested for World Heritage listing. I would have liked the council to emphasise the need for rapid transport and other modes of public transport to be invested in as a lead-in and an incentive to densification. In other words, it comes first, and I applaud what you have said, but it really needs to be invested in, and this should be planned and designated long before the has an opportunity to buy houses and put up something without context, which could cause far more disruption and difficulties than if the transport corridors had been established and things had been done first. And we do need that public transport. We do need access. Government needs to play its part in it, and it needs to help communities with light rail and connections across the region and the islands using heavy rail. I would remind the council that the pattern of habitation we see in many parts of Europe, e.g. Netherlands, France, Germany, Estonia, of contained, densely populated urban centres, large and small, are connected across the land, and land that is left for agriculture, nature, and other environmental services. This pattern is made possible by the rail network, making for accessibility without major reliance on cars, and we certainly have to deal to our reliance on cars. The rail network predominance facilitates protection of agricultural lands, communities, environment, character, and heritage. I would have liked to have seen that the council emphasised that there be more consideration of sustainability and equity. A large old house or heritage building divided into many units gives affordable housing to many more in social need than will be provided for in the replacement, where profit is the motive and building is costly. The greenest building is the one already standing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, are there any questions? I love that phrase, the greenest building's the one that's already standing. Would have been a helpful one after the earthquakes, methinks. All right. Sorry? No. No. All right. Look, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for putting it together at such short notice. You have submitted to the Select Committee?
I am going to.
Good.
We're both going.
Submissions close on Tuesday the 16th, so we're encouraging everyone to, and also encouraging people to speak to the politicians on both sides of the debate, because this is a bipartisan approach from both National and Labor.
No, it's
I just wonder if Lynn Lockhead would like to add something for HPC.
Oh, you've got 8 seconds.
Not really, because I think Diana's covered it well, and we'll be doing a submission to the Select Committee, and we just wanted to support what the council has done in terms of its submission, which we think is a very good submission.
Great, thank you. And we did get the Heritage written submission, the Civic Trust submission, and so we've noted that too as a written submission. So deputation, I'll use the right word. But so thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. The next is Greg Partridge. Hi, Greg.
Morning. How are you?
Nice to see you. Sorry it's at a distance, but far away.
Some apologies again for sending the wrong attachment.
That's okay.
Oh, hi. Am I on?
Yes, you're on. You're being live streamed.
Good morning. Great. Good morning, Mayor, City Councillors and staff. I think I just need to shut down the live stream, otherwise it's going to interfere. Yes, here we go. Right. Can you still hear me?
Yep. It's fine.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for the invitation to be able to speak to the amendment bill regarding the resource management Enabling Housing Supply and Other Matters bill. I'm doing a private deputation due to the fact that the bill's been launched on all of us at haste, and much like yourselves, we're very much at a disadvantage to actually engage with the community and even our own residents association. In principle, I do support the draft submission that the council has published and agree that the bill is incongruous.
Sorry, Greg, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's not very clear. I don't know whether. I think it's on your end. Can you?
Shall I log back out and log back in again?
No, that's better. That's better. You haven't turned into a Dalek. It's just a little bit. Maybe when you speak closer to the microphone, it's better.
Sure. So yeah, I do support the council's.
No, that's worse. That's worse. That's worse.
Sorry, get my microphone covered. Sorry.
No, that's better.
Okay, great. So yeah, I support the council's draft submission and agree that the bill is incongruous, that it's a non-collaborative, blunt, one-size-fits-all piece of legislation that hasn't been carefully considered in terms of well-being and design standards. I also agree that in terms of climate resilience, the bill has ignored the fact that New Zealand signed the Paris Agreement, declared a climate emergency, and that our own city also declared a climate emergency and also an ecological emergency in May of 2019. With that in mind, there needs to be the question asked of the government, why is there no protection in the bill for existing established trees in our city and the other Tier 1 cities across Aotearoa? Trees are the most important natural infrastructure that we have. They cloak the earth in life and are environmentally critical. If as a nation, as individuals and at local and central government level, we don't look after something as important as trees, what does that say about us? The conversation has got to change. There must be more done to protect existing established trees. With that in mind, I would suggest that the council submission should go further than to just suggest 20% of the site's area be landscaped for the use of trees, and that rather the council insists the government uphold the climate emergency and that the government respects the ecological emergency as declared here in Christchurch, and that in order to prevent the deforestation of residential Christchurch, that native trees standing in excess of 3 metres in height, or with a trunk that measures more than 500 millimetres at ground level, should automatically be protected, and that similar consideration should be applied to exotic trees that stand more than 5 metres in height. In addition to that, the practice of developers clear felling trees on sites should be immediately abolished. Now, I know that's a bold statement, but we are living in an environment where COP21 has just happened. The world is well aware of the fact that there is a climate emergency and the temperatures are going to rise, so we naturally need to do something. We need to do it now rather than tomorrow. Clear felling of existing trees is counterintuitive to the battle against climate change, global warming, as well as the mental health and general well-being of city residents. By deforesting neighbourhoods of existing trees, we run the risk of urban heat islands developing in those areas where more densely packed housing is constructed. This is something we can ill afford to do due to global warming, and definitely the temperatures in Christchurch being impacted by that fact. In terms of the national planning standards, the council's draft submission is requesting the spatial extent of medium density residential standards be limited to a 2.5 kilometre radius from the boundaries of the central city zone. That boundary should be defined. At the moment, it's not in your submission, and still should be defined with the north-south-east frame that was led by Stewart and created to define central city zones and central recovery plans. If the boundary is not clearly defined, the central city could be extended well beyond the avenues by the government. That could go deep into Fendleton, Strowan, Tapanui, St Albans, Shirley, east well into Dallington, Avonside, Phillipstown, Limwood, right down to Waltham, south all through Opawa, St Martins, Beckenham, Summerfield, Barrington, and in the west, obviously up through Rickett, Hillmorton, Addington, and connecting again with Fendleton. If that becomes the radius and the deforestation of entire swathes of our city suburbs is not stopped, the environmental degradation, ecological impacts, and the effect on well-being of Christchurch residents would be immeasurable. I'm concerned that the draft submission by council doesn't include a cap on maximum density in that area. And I agree with what Tony has said in his previous deputation that a 65 dwelling per hectare limit would be environmentally balanced and would be more importantly prudent. It would leave room for existing large trees to continue to prosper in housing developments and provide space for additional trees to be planted. And again, that aligns with the council's request for 20% of the sites to be dedicated to trees. It would also provide for housing intensification to occur at a more considered degree, rather than our neighbourhoods being blanket bombed and deforested through a lack of rules to protect not only the all-important environment, but also the well-being of our city. By not setting a housing density limit, as is the case in the current district plan, it leaves the potential for developers to wriggle through loopholes of poorly written policy, and it's juxtaposed to what the City Council submission states regarding trees. I've included in my written submission stuff about infrastructure and how it's going to be heavily impacted by this intensification, and also included 3 waters. Helen Beaumont from the council has indicated that 11.64 billion litres of water were lost through broken and leaking water pipes last year. And in spite of millions of dollars being pumped into fixing that ageing structure, the council is unlikely to get on to the top of the problem anytime soon. With over 420 kilometres of pipes in such poor condition, is our system actually up to actually coping with all this added intensification? With that, I'd like to thank the council again for the opportunity to speak. The residents of Christchurch are reliant on you as elected representatives, as the kaitiaki of Ōtautahi Christchurch, to do the right thing in an era where more balanced housing needs and the protection of trees in our city is required. Questions?
Thank you very much, Greg. We've got a couple of minutes left, so do any councillors have questions for Greg? Yes, Pauline.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. That was a really excellent submission, and thanks for your time in presenting that today. Just on the trees, and including the exotic and the native protections, would that mean that should anyone want or need to remove a healthy tree, be required to get a resource consent, or would it be an absolutely blanket no, in your view?
I would say the answer to that would be, why do they need to remove the tree? If a developer cannot build a development with an environmental and ecological conscience, it should be something that the planning team reject. The city is, as a previous submitter said, we've got only about 11% of tree canopy coverage across Christchurch. We're falling well short of Wellington and Auckland. Auckland's losing 1,000 trees a week due to housing development, and we are obviously in a similar position. I don't have numbers on how many trees are being lost here, but you just need to look around the city to see the devastation that's being caused. Yes, we want to become a national park city, but if we don't have trees peppered throughout our suburbs on private land to actually provide shade, there is no habitat for birds and other wildlife to live. We end up with a dead wasteland, something under the pages of Dolores by Dr. Seuss, where once-lers come in, chop everything down, and we're left with a desert.
Right, I think you've answered my question. Thank you.
Right. There doesn't seem to be anyone else. So look, thank you very much, Haley. Oh, sorry, Haley. No, I meant to ask questions. I was going to thank Greg. Thank you, Greg, for taking the time and making a submission. We really appreciate it. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to move on to... Thank you. I'm going to move on to...
Right, and I'm making a submission to the Select Committee in Wellington as well.
I forgot to tell you. So you're going to the Select Committee and you're going to talk to National and Labor MPs because it's a bipartisan bill.
Yeah, I've already spoken to Megan Woods. She agrees that trees are important, but their focus is completely on housing and not the environment, which is really counterintuitive again. But yeah. Thank you.
But thank you for doing that. Hayley Guglietta from Richmond, according to your name.
Kia ora koutou. I'm here in my own capacity as a resident and business owner of Richmond and an advocate for the inner city suburbs in Christchurch East. I apologise for not having a written submission, as we simply did not have time to activate our groups for genuine engagement.
Yeah.
I do, however, refer to a letter sent in the last few days to you, Leanne, Jake and Pauline from We Are Richmond. That reflects our position based on the work we've completed over the last few years on these issues. Have you received that?
Who have you sent it to?
Leanne, Jake and Pauline.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. You
That's okay. And it was simply confusion over that there was no engagement on this, obviously, because you haven't had time either. But in a lack of understanding of how we could communicate our position on those issues. So I am speaking on my own person, simply because we can't really advocate for something we haven't had time to talk about. So I wish to acknowledge all the other outstanding submitters today who have covered off the issues that this proposed bill brings up, and I commend the proposed response from this council. My focus today on how this situation and lack of engagement has simply created further division within our communities and commercial operators, as well as our local government and central government. This kind of division is not healthy, and it's not conducive to a well-planned, thriving city, and just further lowers our energy, disengagement and trust, of which is at an all-time low. Our people, both including residents and developers, both big and small, are simply frustrated, feel that they have no say or no impact whatsoever on what goes on in their personal investments in the areas that they reside in. Look, we all know we need intensification, but to stop urban sprawl and to create excellent public transport infrastructure, as well as ensuring everyone has access to a home. But this one glove fits all approach does not solve anything. Christchurch is not Auckland and Wellington. Auckland has the same area but 4 times the population, and Wellington has a tiny area with a similar population, both conducive to this bill, as they have the transport and other infrastructure already in place. But more specifically to your submission, I'd just like to see more detail about retaining the SAMS areas, as we've lost so much heritage post-earthquake, and I support the residents of North Richmond who have lovingly reinvested in their homes to the SAMS rules, and to have this taken away will be the nail in the coffin for some of these residents who've gone through so much and already, and some assurance that you will fight, this council will fight to retain those would be great, a good thing to be able to do. And with reference to 5.3.1, enabling a 2.5 kilometre radius, which is really important for the large investment that has been made by both private developers, community groups, the council and central government in the inner city. We need people living in the city to ensure their investment is not wasted and to have a thriving inner city. But if we were to limit this bill to only this, then it does not address the issue of creating well-planned intensification in areas where we can develop transport hubs. Allowing intensification here, there and everywhere will just not achieve this. We'll never get there. We'll forever be the city of cars instead of the city of trees. And finally, I'd like to shamelessly plug the National Park City idea as a way that we can protect our existing trees, create green spaces where intensification has already taken place, such as Linwood, Phillipstown and parts of St Albans, and fully get behind all the wonderful public planting projects that exist around the city in order to achieve this. And we will be submitting to the select committee. We're going to get together over the weekend and put a submission in on behalf of the Richmond community. So, yeah, thank you. That's me.
Thank you very much. And Jake sent me through your submission. Mayor's messages takes a while to get to me. But anyway, I shouldn't say that publicly, should I? It's possibly a good thing. Yeah, so I'm just looking at it now. I mean, that the character side of things, you know, it's something that's specifically kind of called out in the legislative change. And, you know, I'm thinking of, I mean, there are issues around Auckland and Wellington. I wonder, you know, I mean, you're really picking up that one size fits all, but you're also acknowledging that we do need to build up that sense of intensification needs to happen in the areas that have got proximity to those strong transport routes, to the shopping malls, to the schools and parks and services, and all of those things. That's where you need to build up that sense of proximity, intensity, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're just simply never going to achieve a public transport system that people will use if we don't plan it well.
Yeah.
It just won't happen.
And that's why we've picked that 15, that the minimum, 15 households per hectare, because we had this in our sort of kind of planning framework for the Greater Christchurch Partnership, which looks out into Waimakariri and Selwyn, and it's in those areas where we do need to have density to make sense of mass rapid transit, because we will not get mass rapid transit if we do not get the density at the termini is that the correct word for plural of terminus, if we don't get at the end of the routes as well as density along those routes.
That's right, and that's where they're possibly you can see possibly why the government has produced this bill, because it's perhaps they're looking at some councils to say that it needs to be done and you're not doing it.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not saying that's the right way to approach it, but perhaps that's how it's being looked at, which is not great.
I do think the government hasn't quite seen what's already been done with respect to our district plan, which actually does have significant enabling provisions around the residential medium density zones. So is there anyone who's got a question for Hayley? No? Look, thank you very much for coming in at the last minute. It is much appreciated.